Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at a new episode of EPG's podcast. We have here with us today Dr. Casimir Lorenz, who is a co-head of advisory Central Europe at Aurora Energy Research. Dr. Lorenz has a PhD in energy economics with a focus on electricity markets from the Technical University of Berlin and multiple years of experience in power markets. A few mentions about Aurora as well. Aurora is the largest dedicated power markets analytics provider in Europe. It has grown significantly over the past couple of years, and they are doing some of the finest modelings of power markets in Europe with deep dives, including on countries such as Romania. Some of their reports are on their website, but of course, they provide consultancy as well for the services. About a year ago, Aurora published a report on preserving the competitiveness of European industry and power prices, with a focus on the impact on EU ETS and power markets if governments fail to deliver on renewable and coal exit. This was, I would say, almost a prophetic report because it came out in October 2021. I think the gas prices were already starting to increase, but we weren't quite in the midst of the crisis as we are today. The general argument from what I got is that a low renewables build out combined with a slow coal exit would lead to both a higher carbon price by 2030 and higher wholesale electricity prices. This in turn would threaten the competitiveness of European industry, which is something that we are speaking about increasingly more today, especially after the passage of the IRA in the US, but also when we're facing structurally higher energy prices in Europe compared to some other places in the world. This increase in wholesale electricity prices, of course, would also affect energy poverty. Another aspect that's been exacerbated by the energy crisis of the past year. They did a deep dive on Romania as well, in which they've basically shown that in a scenario in which Romania does not pursue an ambitious build out of renewable energy, wholesale prices would be 50% higher than they are today. And that would be combined with a CO2 price that would be 80% more than it is today. Having said that, we will provide a link to the report in the description section of this video. But I would like to move to Casimir and to discuss how has the report lived up? How have the scenarios from your study matched up with the reality of the past year, which of course have brought a set of new dynamics to energy markets across Europe?
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. Very happy to be able to speak here together with you about this very interesting topic. And when it comes to how did this report age, I think it aged very well. For the fact that the main message that we wanted to broadcast with it together with the ECF back then was that if we don't put a lot of effort on renewables, we will stick in the dependence on fossil fuels. And what has happened over the last year was unfortunately that this dependence on fossil fuel, especially gas, brought us extremely high power prices. And with more renewables in the system, the effect would have been significantly lower. So I would say the message of the report is even more topical than it was back then. We need to put a lot of effort on renewables and build up renewables in order to loosen the dependency on fossil fuels. Let it be gas, let it be coal. We saw what this dependency can lead to. And of course, there's this additional factor of the CO2 price that will otherwise exercise additional pressure on our industry. And therefore, I think it's in everyone's interest to put even more effort in bringing renewables up to speed.
No, absolutely. I think one of the conclusions of your work was also that a slower build out of renewables combined with a slower coal exit would increase also exposure to commodity prices, volatility worldwide. And I think that over the past year, this sort of dependence on fossil gas imports has been shown for how dangerous it can be and how it can also leak into power market prices. which is why I wanted to discuss with you a bit more precisely, if you could explain for our viewers. So how would investments in renewables actually put a downward pressure on wholesale electricity prices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to go into the details here. So, of course, bringing renewables into the system comes at a cost to the system as well. However, the additional cost for the system are often not that high as the benefits that we see from the renewables to the system. The system cost of renewables are that you have to build them, and they have very high investment costs. However, the production cost, once you have invested into these renewables, are very low. So they really help to keep wholesale prices down. And not only in the hours when there's a lot of renewable production, but also in the hours when there's little renewable production. But because for these hours when there's maybe not so much wind or not so much PV, you still have the stack of renewables in the system. And this would result that at the end of the merit order, and I guess we're going to discuss a bit about why or not that's a good system at some point, you would still have price reductions actively because you're pushing out the very expensive power plants and just have the expensive power plants or the not so expensive power plants inside. So there is this clear merit order effect of renewables, of reducing wholesale prices in the long term. And the investment cost of renewables, if you have either their revenues secured through PPAs or maybe some subsidy schemes, the investment costs are also not that high because you can reduce financing costs. To be honest, one challenge, of course, at the moment is the increasing interest rates, which is making it harder to build out new renewables and have them highly leveraged. But I still believe that renewables are the best and most efficient option to bring power prices down.
No, absolutely. And I think while indeed interest rates are higher, at least in Romania, we've seen this year, after a very long time, market-based investments. So a lot of investors coming in and trying to install renewable capacities, even without a subsidy or a de-risking instrument. Even if the government is planning to roll out such schemes, we are seeing both solar and onshore wind capacities that are being installed with no support in Romania. Partly because of the very high wholesale electricity prices, probably because of what such investors could get through a PPA compared to what was the case a couple of years ago. But yeah, downsides and upsides, I guess, when it comes to the uptake of renewables.
Yeah, and definitely, when as you said, right, if this is something that is fully market-based, built, the cost to society, so to say, are nearly zero. You just have to make sure that there is enough land and so forth to build those. And then these renewables will have a price decreasing effect on the whole market.
No, precisely, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe, but particularly in Romania, land availability shouldn't necessarily be as much of a problem as in Northwest Europe, and the same as social acceptability with a lower NIMBYism effect here, both to things like expanding the grid and also to installing the capacities, which should provide a better environment were it not for the administrative political barriers, which are of a completely other nature. But you were alluding to this a bit earlier, that renewable investments are capex intensive, and we are functioning in a electricity market design that prices marginality, but these are investments with no marginal cost. Which one I wanted to basically bring up the discussion that will probably be the hottest in the first quarter of next year, which is the reopening. Let's see to what extent of the electricity market design done by the European Commission. And I wanted to basically ask you if you think the current design is limiting the ability of renewables to reduce wholesale prices, particularly as over the past year we've seen gas being the price setter, especially on day-ahead markets, and bringing up the entire wholesale prices across Europe.
Yeah, so I think the quick answer is the current market design is not limiting the effect that renewables can have on the system. The longer answer is, like, we need to look a bit closer to that, because we are currently in an extreme crisis moment with unseen high gas prices. So it's not we're not kind of in a market equilibrium. So the market would adapt to the situation over the long term by building more renewables and pushing out the gas power plants out of the merit order. Nevertheless, I think it's also important to keep in mind where were we coming from. We were coming from a discussion where people were saying, our renewables don't make enough money because we will have in the long run always zero prices. So we had that discussion actually going in the other direction where people are saying, we will only see zero prices and so forth. And now people are saying our renewables are not reducing the price. So that's not really working together, right? So renewables are reducing the prices through this merit order effect by pushing out more expensive generation capacities. But we also want that renewables make some money, right? And therefore it is important that there will not only be the marginal price always paid, but sometimes above the marginal price in order to regain the capex and to finance those renewables. So the market itself is working perfectly, and it's showing that gas is currently a very scarce resource, and we should do everything not to use that, and also empower renewables and so forth to be built. Of course, that's not really helping like end consumers at the moment, right? End consumers are not profiting to that degree from renewables. And how could that be changed? I think we need more initiatives when it comes to incentivizing hedging. Incentivizing hedging for end consumers, for households, but also end consumers as in industry or commerce. Because A, that helps them, and B, it also helps the renewables, because the renewables will be happy to have somebody that has this long-term offtake and give them a good price for having that security. So that's actually a win-win situation. So I think we should really not change our market design away from this merit order system, but we should stick with it, but we should incentivize a long-term hedging on all fronts. And PPAs is one topic, but also maybe having retailers that buy renewables on a longer time scale. I think this would be the best option here. And let's not try to throw over the market design, which we have developed over many years, which have proven to be fully functional. And I think the key point here is really that we stick with it, and that we understand that renewables are reducing the prices already, and they will continue to do so if we build more of them. And it is okay that there are moments where they make money, because they have to make their money at some point as well.
No, precisely. I think these are a couple of issues that sometimes are missed in the discussion on market design. We're seeing that quite a lot in Romania as well, which is whenever someone shouts that markets are broken, well, they're not. They're doing exactly what they're meant to right now. Of course, this does not make it easier, and you need to find some ways to, of course, alleviate the pressure, especially for the energy poor, for those who would otherwise have troubles in affording their electricity prices. But such interventions for retail consumers, not necessarily something that we need to restructure the entire design of the wholesale market. What you said as well is that basically with a bit of patience, which it sounds a bit difficult in moments like this, gas will be eventually pushed out of the market simply because that's how it's designed to work, and that's what happens when you have a technology or a fuel closing the market at such high prices. Then new investments come in and basically replace it in the merit order. So I understand the perspective about being patient. Of course, we do need ways to make sure the benefits of renewables are trickled down towards the final consumers, and especially to households consumers, which have been suffering quite a lot, but also to industry, because your paper was focused quite a lot on industrial competitiveness. And I think that's going to become a key issue going forward in the EU. And basically, how do we make sure that the industrial base that currently exists in Europe continues production while facing structurally higher energy prices? I don't think we're going to be able to outcompete other parts of the world in terms of low energy prices. But it doesn't mean that a strategy focused on products with high value added cannot have high returns in the long term. I just wanted to very quickly ask you something about new renewable investments, and basically whether in the current market conditions, do you think investors are still looking for those long-term off-takers, for those PPAs, or is it profitable enough to just sell electricity on spot markets? Do you think that for new investors, they have enough incentives to close PPAs?
Yeah, you can, like, if you look, for example, on our long-term power price forecast, we see that, of course, we have a very high price level at the moment, but in the long run, price levels are leveling down. And the point is, of course, that an investor is maybe risk averse and a risk affine and would like to go for like only the spot market revenues. But if he wants to have a credit, if he wants to take a loan for his renewable, he needs to prove kind of security to the bank. And even with the increased interest rates, it's still beneficial to have some part of leveraging, so to some part finance your renewables through debt. And for this case, they will need to have such a securitization of the revenue. Therefore, I think there will be, in the long run, still incentives for the investors that are in the power market and investing into renewables. Yes. The question is, how do we make sure that also the demand side, so the end consumers, the industry consumers, have incentives to go into these markets? Because of course, if we're introducing like price breaks, if we're introducing price caps, the end consumers have less incentive to enter such a long-run contract, because I, as an end consumer, would only enter such a contract if I think it will protect me from something. So that's also one reason why price caps can be seen critical. Of course, there's a very big social impact and social perspective to it, why we need price caps. But long-term price caps is setting the very wrong incentives, because having long-term or unlimited price caps will largely reduce the incentive of end consumers to hedge themselves, to go into these long-term contracts, which we need to have, because we want that. Of course, we can go the other way around and say we force all of that, but then we'll at some point get away from this liberalized energy market again. So I think keeping in mind when talking about price caps and other mechanisms, not to reduce the incentives on the demand side, because the generation side in most cases have these incentives already in place, except if we're in a world where there are a lot of like subsidies or secured revenues through the government, for example, CFD schemes and so forth. And this is also why you could say that it's CFD only is not the like just going for everything on CFDs, maybe also not the perfect solution, because this will reduce the incentives on the generation side again. And then big industry companies will have a problem in order to find PPAs and so forth. So it's a bit of a give and take.
No, I think a lot of interesting points in there, especially about the demand side and about how you need to keep thinking that an unlimited cap affects their incentives as well. But at the same time, you could see over the past year how important long-term contracts have been for some producers. I was discussing some weeks ago with someone from Norsk Hydro, and their only aluminum refinery that had to shut down was the one in Slovakia that did not have a PPA. So that was it shows even more, even in times of high volatility, especially how important this is. And as you mentioned as well, for a CFD, if we go to a only CFD type of market, a cost plus type of market, of course, this creates poor incentives for developers as well to invest in renewable capacities.
Yeah.
We discussed a bit about renewables. Maybe it's we take a bit of time to discuss a bit of coal. Romania now has a coal phase-out law as of this year, which means closing down all lignite and hard coal capacities by the end of 2032, with about 1.5 gigawatts remaining online in 2030, dated which in your report, in the more ambitious scenario, there was about, I think, 1 gigawatt of coal left in Romania. Now, coal, both in the political and public perceptions in Romania, but in Central Europe, Eastern Europe more broadly, is a comfortable fallback solution. I just wanted to talk to you a bit about the results of your report and your modeling on carbon prices, and basically what a longer lifetime for the coal fleet means for carbon prices, and in turn, how this affects wholesale electricity prices.
Yeah, happy to go for that. So I think in the very short run, like what we're seeing at the moment, that we maybe, for example, like in Germany, letting a few coal power plants run a bit longer currently, like 1-2 years, I think that's a reasonable approach. However, we should not lose track of the target of phasing out coal in the midterm as quickly as possible, because having coal in the system and producing electricity based on coal, that's emitting a lot of CO2. And given the fact that we have a CO2 budget, it means the more CO2 we emit in the electricity sector, the less we can emit in the industry sector. And the industry sector is much harder to abate. Like the abatement cost for steel and similarly, and also in the transport sector, are much higher than in the power sector. So not doing everything that we can to abate CO2 cheap by going for phasing out coal and investing into renewables would make our life much harder in the future. And that's a bit what we're seeing at the moment, right? Like our CO2 prices have increased significantly. The latest announcement are also going in that direction. We're seeing that maybe slightly lower CO2 prices at the moment, but they will increase even more in the future. And still putting like our trust on coal generation in the medium term, I think is counterproductive for our industry, because it might seem like we're having lower power prices, but we actually don't, because we are dependent still on fossil fuels, which are volatile. We're increasing our CO2 price for the whole of the industry, and in the long run, once an investment for renewables, power prices will stay low. So this is it's a double effect. So I really would encourage to phase out coal in the medium term as quickly as possible. So in the next 1-2 years, we're in a tight situation. Nobody can deny that. But towards 2030, there's no reasoning why we can't phase out coal.
No, I think you're completely right, and especially that it's true that delaying some coal phase-out plans on a very short term can provide some much-needed relief to power markets, but this should not in any way change the long-term perspective. This is something that in Romania was not heard quite properly, which is when Franz Timmermans said some months ago already that there's no taboos in this crisis, including keeping some coal power plants online. Here, people haven't heard the second part of the statement, which is that especially if it also allows a coal to clean transition, obviously with no sort of intermediary step towards gas-fired power plants sized in a way that they would provide baseload power. And that brings me to something that I wanted to discuss with you a bit as well. In your scenarios for Romania, you saw an increase in gas-fired capacities by about 1 gigawatt by 2030. I'm pretty sure that if you run the modeling again this year, maybe it'll be a bit different with the increase of price in gas and with some of the delays in coal phase-out plans across Europe. But something that was very interesting in light of some recent developments in Romania was the fact that in your modeling of the 1 gigawatt of gas capacities, 600 megawatts were in OCGT, in open cycle gas turbines. As part of the coal phase-out plans, Romania is looking into investments of about 1.2, 1.3 gigawatts of CCGTs, some of them at about 800 megawatts, so very large facilities, almost replacing gigawatt for gigawatt some of the coal power plants that are being closed. Just wanted to ask, so why you've looked more into OCGT power plants, which theoretically have a lower efficiency, but might have different aspects that make them favorable in a system which is dominated by renewables.
Yeah, I think the key point when thinking about investment into gas and backup capacities is really looking towards 2030, 2035, where we hopefully in a world with a lot of renewables in the system. That means a lot of volatility. And if we're taking the net zero approach seriously, that would mean we will have a lot of renewables in that moment, really. And that would mean these gas power plants that potentially will have to transfer towards like hydrogen-based power plants will have very low running hours. In general, if you have very low running hours, such a power plant that has low capex and maybe higher generation cost is favorable. And therefore, the easy way is to say, okay, OCGTs would make more sense. The challenge here might be when we are switching towards hydrogen, the price of hydrogen is significantly higher. And the question is, how will these power plants run? If these power plants will run maybe 2-3 weeks in a year continuously, a CCGT could be an option. However, if they are not running continuously, but like cycling a lot and only for a few hours, CCGT might not be optimal because it can then not get to these full efficiencies, and of course the investment costs are higher. So all in all, it's a investment cost calculation, and this investment cost calculation is driven a lot by the number of full load hours that such a plant might have. If you have conservative assumption with regards to renewables, you might assume too high full load hours, which could make it reasonable to go for a CCGT instead of for an alternative peaking technology like OCGT.
No, I think that's a fantastic point to stress out, and that's something that we've been trying to communicate about as well, which is mostly because the capacities that I was referring to earlier that sparked this conversation between us are done through public investments and do not have such an assessment like you mentioned before, an analysis basically of the number of load hours that these plants will function at in the coming years. And even more importantly, as you said, the high efficiency of CCGTs that usually thrown out as an argument for investing in them is only achieved if they function for longer periods of time at once, not if you just switch them on and off to provide some backup for renewables. So, of course, we don't want to already invest in some poorly planned capacities that will create problems further down the road. And the switch to hydrogen as well needs to be carefully taken into account, because it will be incredibly inefficient economically to burn it, basically. And as you said, probably even more expensive. It needs to be taken into account. All right, I just wanted to sort of wrap up the conversation that we had, bringing it a bit closer to home, to Romania. So here, investments in renewables have more or less stalled for the past 10 years. We're seeing some very interesting developments this year, both on market-based investments, but also the Ministry of Energy, some other funds as well have been made available, and we will see another boom, we can almost call it, in renewable investments. But there's still a lot of political and administrative barriers that remain, which of course need to be resolved. EPG has published extensively on that. What I wanted to ask you is, in light of the conversations that we had today, is what advice would you stress to Romanian legislators in regards to renewables, but also the transition of power systems for the next decade?
Yeah, I think one advice with regards to renewables is really, if Romania manages to give a good setup for investors, that there's a lot of land availability, you have good renewable resources, and if the regulation and everything is clear, has very little additional regulatory risk, maybe with price caps or with a retroactive subsidy revocal, if you don't make that access mistakes, you will have a very attractive field for renewable investors, because you're still having rather high prices, good renewable resources, and a stable regulatory framework. And then potentially there's not even need for such an additional securitization through the state, like CFDs or so. So yeah, making sure that you overcome these barriers, not make the same mistakes as other countries like Germany with extremely long approval processes, because this is just hindering it. And these additional amount of renewables will allow you to bring power prices down. So this is then also good for end consumers as well as for the industry. When it comes to backup capacity, I think it's key to really to make that calculation, to see, okay, what is a realistic amount of renewables that we will have in the system? What do we want to have in the system, such that we don't have like some stranded assets? And there it's a very complex calculation to make. You would need to take into account many factors that are driving this full load hours, that are driving the efficiency of these power plants, and make that calculation very diligent in order to set on the right type of technologies that is future-proof and will not lead into new stranded assets.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for wrapping up your thoughts on that. And of course, very importantly, investments and new capacities for renewables in Romania also mean lower prices for households and for industry. And that's definitely something that we need to keep in mind when having this conversation. All right. So with that being said, I would like to thank Dr. Casimir Lorenz very much for joining us today at EPG's podcast. He's the co-head of advisory Central Europe at Aurora Energy Research. Yeah, we hope to continue these type of conversations again in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It was great to discuss with you.